So for example number 7 out of the textbook, example number 7 says solve x squared is equal to 10 minus 4x. So we know the first step is to set it equal to 0, so I'm going to say x squared plus 4x minus 10 equals 0. So to solve this thing, what we're going to do is we're going to try to find two numbers that when I multiply them I get x squared and then negative 10 here. So this is x times x. What are the factors of negative 10? 10 and 1 and 5 and 2, right? And they got to add up to equal 4. Wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. So if I say 5 and 2, then I have 2x in here and 5x in here, and if I subtract them, that doesn't work, does it? Alright, so those won't work. So if I say 10 and 1, I'll have a 10x in here and a 1x here, and when I subtract 1, that doesn't add up to 4. In other words, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a combination that adds up to 4. And, well, there isn't one. So we can't factor this using this method. So whenever we get stuck, we can always use the quadratic formula. Okay? Which is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And you say, well, what's the ABC stuff? Well, there's a 1 in front of here, although we never write it down. So the a term is 1, the b term is 4, and c is equal to negative 10. Now you got to be careful. Make sure that it's written as ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Because if it's not equal to 0, then it's not right. The formula won't work. Okay? Notice that the a is in front of the x squared, the b is in front of the x, and the c is by itself. There's no x by it. So sometimes you might get something like this. You might get an ax plus c. Well, then b equals what? 0, right? Or sometimes you'll get like bx plus c. What does a equal? 0, right? So that's what we have to keep in mind when we're doing this. So we do have an a, b, and c, so I'm just going to plug this in. Negative b is negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 10, all over 2 times a, which is 1. So in the next line I've got x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 40 all over 2. So that's negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 56 all over 2. Now as I look at 56, I want to see if there's a way that I could reduce that. And there isn't. Technically, this is what we call the exact value answer. This is exactly what the answer is. However, we could approximate this by plugging it into a calculator, but in order to do that, we have to separate it. So we would say negative 4 plus the square root of 56 all over 2, and negative 4 minus the square root of 56 all over 2. And if you plug that in the calculator, you'll get like 1.74 and negative 5.74. Okay? Does that make sense? Now we're going to have to repeat those a lot because I noticed on your last test it was the quadratic equations that kind of gave you guys a hard time. So now what does that mean? How can I verify it? I've done all this work. I'm taking the ECT. I want to make sure I have the right answer. How could I verify it? Yes?
You could plug your numbers back in and see if you get the same answer.
Yep. We can plug the numbers back in and see if you get the right answer. So there's lots of ways you could do this. You could do it, we could do it graphically, which is probably the quickest way. Or you could plug it in and write it out by hand. I don't know, let's just graph it real quick. So if I plug in x squared plus 4x minus 10, right? And then I want to plug in, what is it, 1.74, 1.74. Now remember, Mr. Adams did some rounding, so it won't be exactly 0, but it's pretty close, right? We could see that it's pretty close. And then if I put negative, 5.74, again, it's pretty close to 0. Does that make sense?